Hi everyone. I'm really delighted to welcome Tim Farron today. Of course, he needs no introduction. Many of us were members of the party when he was leader. I actually was going to show off my membership card, which has his face emblazoned on it.
Not many of them.
So, of course, so leader of the party from 2015 to 2017. Tumultuous years in politics, and it's an honour to have you here. So please, Tim, take the floor.
Yes, Sam, well, thanks for having us. And it's a massive pleasure to be here. I'll just explain to Sam and Freddie, the thing behind me is probably in my constituency, but I'm not certain. I think it's either goat water, which is not far from Coniston, or it is actually some unknown loch on the west side of the Isle of Arran. One of the two, don't know, just thought it was better than my father's living room wallpaper, which is where I currently am at the moment. It's the first time I've seen him for 4 months, so it's nice to spend a day with him, and nice to spend some time with you as well. What can I say? I mean, to say that politics is in a particularly weird place at the moment would just be the massive understatement of ever. And I guess my focus has got to be, what kind of society do we want to build as we come out of where we are at the moment? I mean, quick observation is that, coronavirus, all the cliches are out there, aren't they? It's unprecedented. It is unprecedented, certainly in anybody's lifetime. How, the freezing of economies overnight in order to try to ensure that we kill off a pandemic that is fatal to many has left massive consequences. Undoubtedly, the actions that individuals have taken have saved thousands of lives. I kind of think that in this, as we try and speak to people about climate change, for instance, which remains the critical challenge, I think, of humankind, often trying to persuade people who are not hugely political that they should take climate change seriously is hard, because they think that the stuff that they do in their own lives, they think, what kind of difference will it make? If I turn the light bulbs off, if I cycle a bit, how does this really make a difference? It's just me. It's just, spitting in a river, really. And maybe coronavirus and how we've dealt with it might give people a different perspective. Because just taking all the politics out of it for a moment, over the last few months, people in this country, by doing individual things, staying at home, working at home, behaving very differently, have undoubtedly hugely reduced the number of infections and the number of deaths. And I just wonder whether that just doesn't give us a picture that actually millions of individual actions actually are hugely powerful, despite the fact that sometimes we'll often feel as individuals that what we do is insignificant. So I think there's lots that coronavirus can teach us, but in the end, I don't want to bring everybody down, but the worst is yet to come. And I mean that in terms of the economic situation that we face. I think that there's no doubt to my mind that the unemployment we've seen so far is just the beginning, and that the government's handling of this at times has been wise and at times has been really stupid. I think that the job losses we have seen so far are, up until the last week, job losses that took place despite the furlough scheme, and therefore relatively modest. But I'll tell you, my constituency, admittedly with relatively low unemployment to start off with, we've seen a 314% increase in unemployment. And that's before furlough unwinds. We now know, as furlough does begin to unwind and people start paying into having to contribute toward the national insurance and the pensions contributions of their staff as of there's less than 3 weeks' time, already you're seeing people lay people off. And so what I suspect is going to happen is that there will be a significant spike in unemployment over the next month or two. And the reality is that Rishi Sunak deserves praise, I think, for the ambitious, very Keynesian approach he took to the furlough scheme and the grant scheme in the early days. But it's almost as though the government's bottled it too early. And the thing is, if you bottle it too early, you waste all the money that you spent. What was the point in paying people salaries and giving grants to businesses to keep going through March, April, May, June, July, only to basically kill those businesses and lose those jobs in August, September, October, because you lost your nerve about the size of the debt. And I think it's an important thing that we just need to grapple with, things that would have seemed unthinkable 6 months ago. And that is that there isn't a cheap option for this country, or indeed any other. There's no cheap option. We are either going to get into absolutely colossal tens of billions of additional debt in order to keep businesses going until such point as the market picks up properly, or to keep people, or help to contribute to keep people in work during this time, or we're going to spend and incur tens of billions of debt to cope with people losing their jobs, because those people will end up on benefits. There will be consequences, obviously, for our health service, mental and physical health services, if that happens. But also, and it's just one little example. A week ago, I did a socially distanced tour of the businesses reopening in the Lake District last Saturday. I went to visit one really lovely B&B. Very expensive, very tight margins. The couple who own it are not wealthy, or run it are not wealthy. They will shut without an additional slug of cash. They will shut. They're fully booked from now through to September, but that's not enough to make up for what they've lost. And they will close in September, October. They're just basically now trying to make as much money as they can before they do end up having to just close the business. Now, what happens next March when hospitality and tourism maybe, God willing, comes back online fully? Well, one of two things. Either that business we propped it up a bit and it's kept going and it's there ready to meet demand as the spring season begins next year, or it's a very pretty dead, empty building with no business in it. There's your two choices. So it's not just that it costs money to keep people in work and it costs people to keep people on the dole, on benefits. It also is foolish to let businesses collapse, because if you do so, they aren't there ready in the blocks to run out of them the moment it's possible to do so. So we're going to see in the next few weeks or so whether Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings et al. Have got the stomach for the long term. The evidence of the summer statement last week is that they haven't. And what's worse, that we're doing the opposite of building back better. Understandably, we're desperate to try and get people back to work, but it's about trying to boost demand, and it's about to getting low-paid people back in work as quickly as possible. In other words, a kind of fairly light replica of what we went into the lockdown with. And building back better will take serious ambition, which is why, I'm interested in, and there'll be many of us on this call, I think, who may even know the history of this better than I do, but in the invocation of the Roosevelt New Deal and more generally of Keynesian economics. What is intriguing, and you'll have heard all this already, is if you look at the Roosevelt New Deal, it was an absolute application of Keynesian demand-led economics. Keynes, of course, always said that in times of recession or depression, it's better to pay a man, his words, pay a man to dig a hole and then fill it back in again than to leave him idle. The point being two things. One is that guy's got an income and he'll go and spend it. And also, he's got a sense of purpose and dignity. And those things are equally important. But of course, you don't just need to do something pointless like digging a hole and filling it back in again. And Roosevelt did a whole bunch of things that were not digging a hole and filling it back in. They were building dams and railways and things that actually made a difference for generations afterwards. And that's the opportunity on the table for this government. It was something we should have been doing long ago anyway. Something the coalition should have done. But nevertheless, it is something that we can do now. Talk of the Roosevelt New Deal has been derided by many of us, rightly. I don't need to tell you this, I'm sure you heard the stat, but the Roosevelt New Deal was, roughly speaking, equivalent to 40% of US GDP. And the additional infrastructure announcements that we could term Boris Johnson's New Deal equate to 0.2% of UK GDP. Now, I'm not saying that's not good. £5 billion will do some good. It's not transformational, is it? You spend that in Cumbria, I reckon it'll just about make a difference. Nationwide, you'll barely feel it. And I think that's where we need to start taking people. I am the opposite of a kind of Corbynista there are no economic consequences to, economic incontinence. I do not think that. I am a person who believes in a mixed economy and in a business-driven economy, and I'll come to that in a moment, maybe. But I think this is, just to say the least, a peculiar time, and there is you either incur debt and misery, or debt and hope. They're your choices. That's it. And so let's go for debt and hope. And that means that it's not just about propping up businesses in the short term, because I think that is helpful to a degree. I agree you can't save every job, but you can save an awful lot more than the government is about to do. But it is also about proper infrastructure that will generate economic heat, jobs, demand in the economy, and also then generate demand for education and training that then feeds those things going down the line. So, affordable housing, social rented housing in particular, green energy right across the country. We've got the biggest, after Canada, the biggest tidal range on planet Earth. We use nearly none of it. And yet something like more than 90% of the supply chain of hydro, tidal and marine technology that is in this country is British. It's domestic. We haven't lost that expertise yet. We deserve to have lost it, given how little we've used it, but we haven't, largely because lots of the kind of test centres are in the UK, because guess what? We've got the second largest tidal range in the world. We just don't use it here. And so there's all those things that could be done, adding enormous value that our future generations would thank us for. So I think that's undoubtedly where we should be. I think getting the balance right about what public health advice you give people, in the end, it's difficult to get it absolutely right. Medical advice will tell you different things in different countries, but broadly speaking, it's the same. And in the end, all I want from government is a kind of unpaternalistic, believable, science-driven clarity. And for what it's worth, Mark Drakeford in Wales is worth a watch. He's quite a dull man, bless him. But if you look at the politics and the spin and all the kind of presentational stuff around Nicola Sturgeon and Boris Johnson, then compare that with the really incredibly straightforward, I'm telling you straight, head teacher, giving the daily announcements type approach of Mark Drakeford, I think I wish we had some of that. I'm sure there's lots wrong with him. I don't know as much about the Welsh Assembly governments apart from Kirsty's excellent work as I should, but I observe him and think there's a grown-up we could do with one of them who wasn't playing politics during this time. But my final thing really just to talk about, it's important that we do focus on this given the audience I'm talking to, is the future of the party and what are we for? Now, my hope was a year ago that given what Jeremy Corbyn was doing, given the blindingly good job Joe Swinson did for a lot of the time, and we collectively made some poor decisions at the end and also encountered some bad luck. But let's not forget that May to September, October period last year was a roller coaster, and a lot of it was down to Joe's energy and vision, and she had a plan. And okay, it doesn't always work, but she had a plan. And obviously I'd have loved us to be in a situation where if we didn't overtake Labour in December, nevertheless a Labour Party that had chosen to carry on with the kind of Corbyn legacy and a Liberal Democrats with 40, 50 MPs, suddenly you really are looking at a kind of post-First World War scenario where the Liberals overtake the Labour Party. I'm going to be really blunt with you and say I'm afraid with 11 seats and with the Labour Party having, in my view, the good sense to elect Keir Starmer, that isn't on the table. But it doesn't mean we're not relevant. We're massively relevant. I know this has been said a lot recently, so I'm sure you know these figures, but one of the things that Joe managed to achieve was to significantly improve, maybe not on the number of seats that I won, but on the number of second places I managed to get, which in the terms of the future is very significant. She managed to take us up to 91 second places. If you add that to the 11 first places, that's over 100, where we are one of the races in that two-horse race. And on top of that, of course, 80 of them are versus the Tories. Now, I don't know what the mood music's going to be at the next general election, but I think that there's no doubt with the SNP being where they are, there is no path to a Labour majority at all in the UK. There is a path to them losing. that majority, or the Tories losing that majority, and we are essential to it. And fundamentally, any political party that wants to do anything of any significance has to have credibility. And now sometimes that's hard fought for with us and not always easy. And often people will deride us for not having credibility. Actually, if you are an integral part of the path and an indispensable part of the path towards Boris Johnson losing his majority, you suddenly become credible again. And that's something that's not just relevant in the seats where we're second, or there's plenty of seats where we're not second or first, but are still challenging. There's a dozen I can think of off the top of my head. And you are not just relevant in those seats because you are relevant to the path for Tory defeat. Then you're relevant everywhere. But that's not enough. Simply being a good second isn't enough. We have to develop a narrative as to why we're different. We're not just Labour's country cousins. We have something very distinctive to say. We are Liberals. There's a reason why we're not in Labour. We are people take a very different view of the world to them, a different heritage to them, a different outlook to them. And so it's really important that we build up our strength and our position and our clarity on the issues that we care about. And a couple of thoughts. I do think that when we're talking about the climate emergency, we have to talk about it in terms of the kind of infrastructure, massive investment I was talking about earlier on. I think if climate change is only of interest to a bunch of Guardian readers, we're stuffed. We're never going to tackle the problem. We have to be able to reach out beyond those people for whom climate change is a serious, immediate, felt priority. And so what do we do about that? Well, I think, we have to go with the times and consider how we can turn tackling climate change and building the infrastructure that will do that swiftly as a kind of patriotic, unifying national endeavour that draws us all together and that celebrates innovation and celebrates high quality engineering and celebrates the training and celebrates the delivery of things that are the best in the world. I think there's no problem, and I think in fact a positive way of perhaps bringing us together and using some of the emotions that have been so badly exploited through Brexit, but nevertheless offers a possibility for unity. So I think climate change, but not just whining on about it, but actually having proper thought through solutions that inspire. And then the second thing is just an observation, and I've said it to both Layla and Ed, and I will keep saying it, that I think our 3-point plan for the party surviving and growing is: 1, local government, local government, local government, local government, pick a ward and win it, rebuild your base, care about councils, care about communities, win, 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 win on the ground. That's thing 1. Thing 2, I've already talked to you about, really, that we reckon that we make everything of the fact we are the crucial part of the path to Johnson losing his majority. So we target those seats. We don't ignore the others, but we target some of those seats in order to be able to take Johnson out next time round. And the third thing, well, I think it's being the party of business. What a weird thing to expect a lefty like me to say. But I really think it is. And here's why. First of all, I think there's a massive growth in this country of people who see self-employment, setting up their own businesses, often small and often remaining small, as being a thing which is an aspirational thing. And I think the entrepreneurial spirit, the more I think about it, the more I think it's the liberal spirit. It's the desire to make your own luck. It's the desire to be your own boss, the desire to create opportunities for others. It's the desire to be creative. And I think that's something where we should absolutely be. And look, when you're the third party, you can't always dictate the terms of your place in the market entirely. And then there's another reason why we should choose to be the party of business, large and small, but particularly small and medium-sized. And it's this. So Labour, whatever happens, their brand is such, for all of its positives and negatives, its brand is such that it will never be seen as the party of business. That's just not within its field of view. Blair managed it a bit at its absolute height. We're nowhere near that. They're nowhere near that. So they can't be it. And the Tories, because of the consequences of COVID-19 and their likely reactions to it, as we saw betrayed very much by what I thought in many ways was quite an unambitious statement this week, the more I think about it, by Rishi Sunak. And also by the consequences of not just Brexit, but the manner of the Brexit we're likely to get, the Tories will not be able to help themselves but cheese off businesses, large and small. And you've seen, for example, their overlooking of self-employed, of new starters, of the directors of very small limited companies in the kind of COVID rescue packages. The 3 million people who are excluded. Jamie Stone did an absolute blinder of a job in putting together the all-party group that I'm proud to be a part of. Absolutely textbook Lib Dem parliamentary campaigning. And that reaches out to a whole bunch of people who mostly will have voted Tory last time round. They might have voted Blair once or twice, but they'd be habitually Conservatives. But these are people who are ours for the taking. Now, is that a path to majority? No. But it's a path to relevance and significance in a policy sense, if you like, as well as our tactical position in being second in 80 Tory seats makes us credible and relevant in a strategic sense, in an electoral and a political sense. And that's what you want, clarity and credibility. The two C's which every leader needs, clarity and credibility. And I think that's how we achieve it. And I think we matter massively. I think we have the most appalling government. Rishi Sunak stands out probably because Brexit has absolutely cleansed the Tory party, not just of talent, but of integrity. And he stands out as somebody who, looks basically competent. And that, you can look a genius when you stood next to the pygmies that are around him. And I really fear for the country when you've got a habitual liar in number 10, when you have got a party whose motivation is entirely political. The Cummings episode is just emblematic of that, really. And we want politics which is of integrity. Yes, we want liberals in power, but we certainly want populists out. And we're prepared to work with others in an intelligent way who might not entirely be liberals, but who are broadly progressives to make sure that Britain is better. And I'm sure it can be. So you've never mattered more. Winning on the ground in Cambridge, locally, nationally, and everywhere else is massively, massively important. And remember, whoever is elected leader in a few weeks' time will have been elected leader of the biggest Liberal Democrat party that has ever existed. It was David Steele's early days, the last time the Liberal Party had as many members as the Lib Dems have now. Back in the time when the Tory party had 10 times more members than it does now, when political parties just had more members. So, for given the nature of the time, our membership is huge. It's full of people who joined in the last 4 or 5 years, people who are idealistic, people who are passionate about British values being better than the ones that they are depicted as being, who are angry about Brexit, angry about Boris Johnson's approach to politics, and just think things can be better. And we've got to take that inspiration and that passion and channel it into winning seats locally and nationally. Because in the end, winning is your passport to power. And it's not grubby and Mandelsonian and somehow, a terrible thing to want to win. As I say, my admiration for Tony Blair is largely because he beat the Tories 3 times. You don't need to agree with someone's politics inside to think, you know what, being that effective is something I admire and I want to copy. Or at least learn from. So there you are. There are some early ramblings. I'm all yours. Ask me what you like.
Thank you very, very much for sharing your thoughts with us. And I should say, by the way, that if anyone has any questions, you're very welcome to send them either to me or to Freddie, and we'll put them to Tim. I'll start by, so obviously one thing you touched on quite a lot is the opportunities the party has. And you briefly mentioned the leadership election at the end, which obviously will shape the party's future. I think you surprised quite a few people by sort of coming out of your neutrality to publicly endorse Ed Davey, and I'm really interested to know sort of what compelled you to make that decision, and was it a difficult decision to make?
Yes, and I think first of all, I want to be careful in answering that because I'm not here to be Ed Davey's proxy at all. I love Layla, I think she's really great, and she'd be a fine leader. I think that very difficult decision to make. Leaders do very often back candidates in leadership elections. Paddy Ashdown couldn't help himself; he always backed somebody, and was very influential when he did it. And others, David Steele has done in the past, Ming Campbell as well. Charles, God rest him, never had the chance, and and Nick's kind of sort of taken himself off the kind of the main sequence, if you like, because of the work that he does. I took the excuse to stay neutral last time round between Joe and Ed. I did obviously cast a vote, but I won't say in which direction. I was intending to remain neutral. And then I kind of think this is a really important leadership election. I mean, they always are, but this is a really important leadership election. And I'd come to the conclusion that Ed was the right person for this moment, for a number of reasons, and thought that if I thought that, and if I thought that it wasn't just a general preference, I was doing it because I thought it was significant to the party's future, then it was a bit cowardly for me to stay in my box and keep my mouth shut. So that's what persuaded me to come out and support him. In the end, it's very difficult to talk about candidates and their strengths, because you automatically then are inferring weaknesses in the other. And I genuinely love Layla Moran, and amongst the reasons, cowardice would be one reason for not coming out and declaring, and the fact that I think Layla's ace would be another reason. I wouldn't want to upset her, and I really regret it. I hated telling her that I'd made the choice to come out and support Ed. It was it's not a thing I enjoyed doing. So in the end, I think we are. It's about strategy and approach. In the end, I think that we have to be a party that recognises that we have to speak to, and I say this as a person who has always been on the left of the party and remains so. We will not win if we can't make ourselves electable. Yeah, a part of the thinking of a lot of moderate people who voted Tory last time round, in loads of seats up and down the country, and we doesn't mean we don't take on Labour and try and beat them. We absolutely must. We need to learn lessons from the Ashdown-Blair years. I can't stress that too much. We need to learn the right lessons. And the lessons were pacts are stupid and they are counterproductive and they make you less than the sum of your parts. Intelligent nods and winks and a relationship behind the scenes where you do one another no harm and have a common enemy, that works. That works. And I think Ed gets that. And I think his approach is not talking about Labour publicly too much, but talking to them quietly, understanding that pacts and deals aren't the answer, but seeking to be part of a movement that the electorate develops. I also just think that I was never an opponent of the coalition, but I was a coalition skeptic. But if you have to pull out our many achievements, but the fact that we have been without coal being burnt in our power stations for 4 months now, it's entirely down to Ed Davey. It's entirely down to Ed Davey. Those 2.5, 3 years he was in the cabinet, the difference he made was astonishing. And so I think he's like any leader, will need some polishing, some support, some development, and all the rest of it. And if it's Layla, that's great. I just think that for this moment, in terms of the strategic priorities of the Liberal Democrats, it's important that we don't move right or centre. We stay where we are politically, but we have to be able to be in a position where, moderate thinking, decent people who were massively terrified by Corbyn and thought we were, going a bit too far trying to stop Brexit in Yeovil, for example, are prepared to vote for us. And I want to win elections, because you achieve now when you lose. And I love Layla anyway, so I'll just be very, very careful here, because I don't want to. I'm not, like I say, I'm not here as Ed's proxy. I know you asked me the question, but there you go.
Thank you. So obviously you've done the job yourself before and had your own fair share of controversies when you were leader. What do you sort of think was your greatest achievement when you were leader, and what do you regret that you didn't manage to achieve when you were leader?
Well, I think the fact the party's still alive, probably. And I think that you bear in mind, you just lost 90% of your MPs. We'd gone down to a membership of just 40,000 before the 2015 election. And we were just completely shell-shocked and hammered. So really, my job was to, it sounds so sort of simplistic here, but it was to lift spirits. It was to inspire people, to make them still feel that they were, we went in government, we didn't have MPs, but we believed in something. And I went with, I guess I sought to be, as I always seek to be, authentic. And the thing that was on my heart, troubling me hugely at the time the leadership election was going on between me and Norman and just after, was the refugee crisis. And so I thought, right, I really care about this. I know Liberals do too. And I want us to be the people who speak out. I want people to feel good about being Liberals by doing something good, and by making it too hard for David Cameron to turn his face away. And I think we sought to achieve that. But I think you start off basically just trying to inspire people who are broken. And that's not easy. And I think we did it. I also think, let's be honest, we did something that David Cameron never did. And that was to spend a bit of time before the referendum drawing a bit of a plan B up as to what would happen if we lost it. And the plan was, the minute we know it's going the wrong way, Tim, go to bed and get up at 5 o'clock, and then you do every single scrap of media that's available, and you channel the angst as emotionally as you can that what turned out to be 16 million people would be feeling as they woke up that morning. And we did, and the membership doubled, and then it trebled, and then we won Richmond. And then Theresa May called the election too soon. And there's no point being full of regrets. I'm not. I mean, I love what I do. There are times, don't tell anybody, there are times, and I will be whoever's the new leader, where I'll think, oh, for pity's sake, give me the wheel. And so there's an element about that. I did talk to a certain member of Parliament who shall remain nameless, where we cooked a kind of plan where that person would run for leader and win, and I just basically tell them what to do. And we decided, that was after a couple of pints, and we both decided that life was too short, so we didn't do that. And so there are times that you just think, oh, I'd do this, I'd do that. And it's like they say youth is wasted on the young. Well, leadership is wasted on the people who are leaders. They generally get better and their ideas are better after they've been leaders. So I've no desire to do it again. I'd be very clear to state. But I think, you think, oh, I'd have done this differently and that differently. In the end, I guess the regret is that I didn't do it longer. And also, of course, that I wasn't able to kind of deal with this sort of Protestant inquiries about what my faith meant to me and so on. And in the end, I thought, well, I could have given really good, and I think I do these days, give really good, solid sort of theological and liberal answers to those questions. But when you're the leader of a party that's getting 30 seconds coverage a day, you haven't time for that. You've only got to try and bat it away. I want to talk about Europe. I want to talk about the NHS. I want to talk about climate change. Stop asking me about flipping Leviticus, So it's frustrating, or it was frustrating. I'm honest with you. I'm utterly at peace with where it is now, where I am now. I think in the end, I made the right choice to step down. We did a lot in 2 years. The party's still here.
If you don't mind me asking, now that we've got a little bit more than 30 seconds, what if you were presented with the sort of issues that you were in that leadership election, what was your thinking behind that? Because obviously it's quite a divisive issue. Even within CULA here, people take different opinions on what you've said during the election and since. Yeah. So I was interested.
Well, in the end, I think the problem is when you get asked a specific thing. So it is countercultural to think there is such a thing as sin, right? But Christians think there is such a thing as sin, and that every single human being is guilty of it. So I don't play it back over in my mind often, but I sometimes kind of think I should have challenged the question and said that the question itself was homophobic because it assumes that some are more guilty of sin than others. That's not true. Absolutely not true. Now, if you don't buy the theology and the doctrine of sin and all the rest of it, and you think Christianity is a little garbage, that's another conversation we can have about the fact that my Christianity is absolutely based on evidence. I put my faith in Jesus Christ because I believe he existed and he is who he says he is. And there are consequences to that. You will live your life differently if you believe that to be the case. So I think there's that, but I think that in the end, I think the challenge is, if you are Jacob Rees-Mogg and you accept sort of biblical morality and what have you, but he's a social conservative, you would. And it seemed in today's thinking, it wouldn't have been the case 30 years ago, a person who describes themselves as a liberal, how on earth can they take the Bible seriously? And my sense actually is that I guess comes out of the religious illiteracy that we have now. I'm not blaming anybody for that. It's just the society people are in these days. And in the end, you go with what you've got. The difficulty you always find whenever you're dealing with, some crisis communication sort of issue, the last thing you really should be doing is getting into the detail of it. You need to move it on. And so I think if I was the leader of the opposition and I was being given 10 minutes a day, we'd have had time to go through it. And why, it's blindingly obvious that I believe in equality and freedom and liberty and people making their own choices, and being who they choose to be and who they are. But like I say, when you're the leader of a small party, we weren't even the third party during 2017, don't forget, and you're getting nearly no coverage whatsoever. You are just trying to clear the deck so you can talk about Brexit.
And that relates quite strongly to an article you wrote yesterday, I think, or it was published yesterday in Christian Today, where you, I think, sort of contrast the passion and energy that you sort of get from Christian correspondents on issues like abortion with silence when it comes to things like domestic abuse. I mean, why do you think that is? Why do you think sort of Christians can be mobilised on some issues and not on others? And how can the Lib Dems possibly benefit from it?
I mean, let's be honest with you. If you look at the actual actions of Christians within their communities, they massively, disproportionately contribute in terms of social society, civic society, other faith groups as well, by the way. But you in particular, though, in terms of tackling homelessness and poverty and all of those things, Christians Against Poverty, one of the most effective outfits you've ever seen in terms of literally helping people out of crippling debt. So hugely disproportionately significant. I think my short answer, and I alluded to it being as generous as I could be, basically Megan, my researcher, and I, looking through my inbox at the time of the domestic violence bill last week, we were just astonished by all of these all of these emails we got, which would start with "as a Christian," and then it would just be about the 2 abortion amendments. Not a single one said, "Please vote for the domestic violence bill because it's great," or "This is why it matters." To me, it was all about abortion. Now, I'm not saying people are wrong to raise those issues. Of course, they can raise those issues. I just thought it was stark, and I thought, well, if that worries me as a person who is a Christian, what kind of a witness, if you like, is that to MPs who aren't, and to their researchers? So the short answer is, although, God bless them, the Christian Institute, who are a lobbying organisation, Christian lobbying organisation, but all they tend to do is focus on, shall we say, issues of personal morality, one way or another. And fine, do that. I'm not saying that isn't a case you should make, but why are you not writing to me furious that the government's cutting the aid budget and closing down the International Development Department? Why are you not appalled about domestic violence? Why are you not writing to me about homelessness? I just, in a sense, it was a obviously when you write an article like that, it can be read by anybody, but it was an article really as a kind of a loving rebuke to Christians out there. You're not really giving the gospel a great name if all you do is bang on about 1 or 2 issues and never demonstrate a kind of a love and compassion beyond that.
To take it back to sort of where the Liberal Democrats should be going, and not to put you in the sort of backseat leader position, but if we're struggling, as it seems that we are, to win at the same time traditional Liberal rural constituencies and generally ex-Tory city constituencies that are against Brexit, and those seem to have a sort of fundamental disconnect, a bit like the Labour Party struggles with as well. Where should we pitch the party, and what coalition of voters should we be looking for?
That's a great question, Freddie. I think it's easier now that Brexit has happened, sadly. So I am desperate for the UK to rejoin the European Union, but revenge might be a dish that's best served cold. I think that we should remain. I would argue that we should continue to have the UK seeking membership of the European Union on our terms as a thing in our manifesto. It's been there in every election since 1955. Why should we change now? But I absolutely 100% do not think it should be top of the list. And for what it's worth, my sense is that those Remain constituencies, some that we won, but the likes of, Wimbledon and Esher and Walton that we got close in, where we absolutely have to build on. That was not as much about Brexit as it was about that sense of values, liberal values that were internationalist, that were pro-business. So there was something which is why I think our business appeal is important. And I think that values issues, that values divide is still there. And so I don't think that's a problem. And I think it'd be easy to play into it by talking about issues to do with climate, to talking about education, health, and issues on the ground, and contrasting with the behaviour of the Conservative government on those matters. Those voters are still there for us in middle class, Remain inclined suburbia, and I think what pitches to those voters and keeps them in our orbit this time round will not be as off-putting, anything like as off-putting as it was to people who wanted to vote for us in Newquay or in Barnstaple and so on. And I absolutely think that we have to be thinking, not just because he's a great person. I think of Danny Chambers, North Cornwall. I think of Lisa Smart, Hazel Grove. And I try to think when I am thinking out because their constituencies I know a little bit, they're different to mine, but there's some similarities. And they are your typical seats, that we held throughout the 97 to 2015 era. And their seats are Tories hold now. We've got great candidates. We need Labour people to vote for us, but we also need moderate Tories or people who voted Tory last time to vote for us. So we've got to be thinking, if our pitch doesn't work there, and by the way, Hazel Grove has also got quite a share of, it's not quite Esher and Walton, but it is full of Mancunian lawyers and the likes. So it has got that kind of middle class sort of commuter belt about it as well. So we've got. I try and think of Danny and Lisa, because I think if it helps them, we should do it. If it hinders them, we shouldn't. And so our messaging has got to continue to build that coalition of moderate voters, people who are socially liberal, economically liberal, internationalist in outlook, progressive, dare I say, sophisticated values, which we will need everywhere, but they're in more concentration in the Twickenhams and the Eshers and Waltons and Wimbledons and so on. And on the one hand, but we've got to be, and this is where I think my experience in my patch, I hope, is useful. We've got to be the party of the masses in the countryside. And I don't want to play class war, but let's play class war. So there are. My line has got to be in the West Country, in Westmorland, in bits of North Yorkshire, and other places as well. There's two parties involved in the politics of the countryside. There's the lot who own it, and there's the lot who understand the people who live there, and we're the latter. And I think a lot you can learn from Paul Tyler, who was, of course, the MP for North Cornwall before Dan Rogerson, and who was the chief whip for Paddy, but also spent a lot of time being the kind of rural affairs spokesperson. He absolutely got that. He saw politics is always binary in a first past the post system. It's always binary. You're going to make yourself one of the two and have a general thing that you're going to say. And it was about, it wasn't just about farmers. They're iconic, but they're relatively small in number as a group. But it's about those broader rural issues. It's about small schools, it's about public transport. It's about excessive second home ownership. It's about the quality of health services when you've got to travel a long distance to go and get that treatment, and being on the right side of that. And I think so I think those things absolutely sit alongside each other. In the end, being credible and being a plausible alternative to a government that you don't like is a good place to start in both of those places.
Tom has asked a very interesting question about whether you think there's a conflict between sort of the personal faith of politicians and public policy. And gives the example of Tony Blair's policy on faith schools being heavily influenced by his personal faith. Is it realistic to say, that politicians can act without being concerned by their own personal faith?
No, just as a Marxist isn't going to act without being concerned about their Marxism. I mean, I think it's an understandable question, and I've thought about this an awful lot over the years, and I don't think it's an issue, and I'll tell you why. Because everybody has a worldview, and you form your worldview in conscious and subconscious ways, and maybe your worldview is in part influenced or entirely influenced by what we would call a religious faith. Who are we to say that is less significant than your views being, informed entirely by John Stuart Mill or Hayek or Marx, or just the mass of culture that's around you? So we don't expect Marxists to leave their values at the door when they walk into the room. Neither should we expect people of faith. You should be open about it. And we should also be very careful about really quite illiberal tropes in all this. Because, Tony Blair converted to Catholicism after he'd left Number 10. Why? Because it would have been illegal for him to be a Catholic as Prime Minister. And we still have this nonsense. The Liberal Party began because of religious intolerance and to call for religious freedom. The reason why Catholics were not permitted, and still aren't technically permitted, to be Prime Minister and to hold that position, and why they have been, targets of suspicion and still are, I think Christians more generally are, is this sense that they owe their allegiance to something other than the country. You're not properly patriotic because you owe your allegiance to Rome, or indeed to God. And and Jewish people are familiar with this as well, I'm afraid. This notion that this trope that you have split loyalty, and we've got to be very careful about that. We've seen under Jeremy Corbyn, progressives can be easily duped into not very progressive mindsets on these things. In the end, obviously there are some worldviews that we think are utterly objectionable, about forcing other people to do things which are completely and utterly wrong. But broadly speaking, 90% plus of worldviews, whether we like them or not, they're a worldview. And the idea that someone who has a sort of a clear religious faith, that they must leave their worldview to the door, but everybody else is allowed in, is not liberal and not silly and not sensible.
One of the big sort of policy issues that seems to excite a lot of younger Lib Dem members especially, is that of universal basic income, and potentially either making it official party policy or looking into it. What's your position on UBI, and where should we go as a party on that issue?
Yeah, so it was our party policy in the 90s. It was very much a Paddy thing. I don't know this, but of course Ed Davey was the economics advisor at the time, so I wouldn't be surprised. It wasn't a thing that kind of came at that time. But a number of us, I think, as we got closer to, I think under Charles's leadership and then under Nick's, we just basically backpedaled on it and thought it's a bit hippie-ish, doesn't add up. It's not sensible economics. And I'm still a little bit nervous about it, but I have changed my opinion. I broadly think we should be seriously thinking about it, even adopting it. The economics of it, we need to be clearer about, because of course, universal basic income is one thing, but how much is it? And that's the crucial thing that we need to decide. And then that will obviously have a big impact on what that means. And is there any conditionality, or those things? There's lots of things that would need to be worked out. But I actually think that the principle, I've always thought the principle was a good one. I was always doubtful about the practice. I'm now beginning to think we have to try and make the practice work. And so if you ask me, we should definitely think about it. We should probably adopt it, but I want to make sure that it will work out. If you talked about this 6 months ago, whole bunch of people would have thought either, why should I be paying people to not work? Or more likely, they go, I can't see how that would benefit me. And now you've got millions of people who can see exactly why it might benefit them. And not just those people who've been immediately hurt, but you can now see how life can change like that. And how the security that we had banked upon, how we thought our life was dependable and predictable, it's not, is it? And lots of people who were fairly secure in themselves and in their incomes and in their outlook, just before Easter, now aren't. And so if you offer people something which is just it's not the only thing it's for, but we'll call it this, something which is just a much safer and more secure security blanket, safety net than was there beforehand, I can see a huge market of people saying, yeah, I get that. And likewise, I said earlier on, if we're going to build back better, well, what do we mean by that? And I think making sure that we commit ourselves to being a country that ensures that nobody's in poverty, and that everybody has got access to a basic, decent standard of living, that's not a bad place to start. And alongside all the stuff to do with sustainability and infrastructure expansion and what have you, I kind of think that the principle of it is good. I think that the demand for it, politically, if I could be so shallow, is potentially there. I think, I don't think there's a market in us going left of Labour. However, Starmer will be, quite wisely from his point of view, cautious. He's been super cautious. So cautious that he will refrain from doing things that another Labour leader would have done. And so occasionally there will be a radical policy out there that isn't super trotty, but is a radical policy that we can grab and make our own, that Labour wouldn't touch, and we have the space. And we've got to be clever and think about when those things come up and what they are and which they are, and be sparing in those things. I think universal basic income might be one of them. David Steele used to say that a good Liberal candidate dresses right and talks left. And the idea being that if you don't frighten the horses and you don't look like a screaming trot, then the good people of North Cornwall and Hazel Grove, for example, will listen to radical politics from you in a way they wouldn't from Labour, if you see what I mean. The respectability almost of the kind of liberal disposition. And we may have grown out of that and beyond that now, but that was definitely Jeremy Thorpe's great appeal, was that he was a man who said more radical things than Harold Wilson and looked posher than Ted Heath, and it worked for a bit. So I think the short answer is yes, let's go for it, but let's do the sums.
You've made Gabriel very happy by endorsing Jeremy Thorpe, who he's just written an entire dissertation on.
Excellent. Did he do it?
Wait, Gabriel would say certainly not. I think we'll wrap up soon, but with these lockdown talks, we like to end on a slightly less serious couple of questions. So I've got three sort of quick-fiery questions. The first is, what have your lockdown hobbies been? I know we're sort of relaxing a little bit, but have you gotten into any new hobbies over lockdown? Who are some MPs you particularly admire from other parties, current or recently former perhaps? And then finally, one for the Lib Dem meme makers out there, what's the backstory to that picture of you holding a bottle of milk? So I'll let you answer those in any order.
Okay. The milk meme, which I absolutely blinking love. So when I was DEFRA spokesperson under Nick, so we're going to say about 2009, the big issue in farming matters at that point was that dairy farmers were getting nothing, getting paid less than it cost them to produce a litre of milk, and we had a fair trade for British farmers campaign, and that was a whole bunch of parliamentary candidates for rural seats posing with a bottle of milk with me somewhere in Bournemouth, I think. But anyway, they always crack me up though, so please keep doing them. second, what was the middle one? There was the ask me about lockdown things. And
MPs from other parties that you admire.
Yeah, well, all right. Well, I mean, I could pick all the predictable ones who basically we think are kind of secret liberals. There are some who I really don't agree with, but I kind of think are just honourable, good people, even if they're a bit quirky. So you're going to hate me for this one. But what's his name? Steve Baker, the mad Brexiteer. He's actually a decent man, and he's very earnest. He's very serious. He's sometimes, eccentric would be the right word, but he's a good person. And if you remember, this is not what changed my mind on it at all, but if you remember on Brexit Eve, when they were all being utterly vile, he was the one who put out this incredibly gracious tweet about how other people thought differently, and so he wasn't going to be making any kind of great big song and a dance about it. So he's a kind person, eccentric but kind. Rachel Maskell, Labour MP for York, again, really nice, decent person, genuine servant of her constituency. And what else have we got in terms of others who I quite like? I mean, she's not an MP anymore, but I was always in awe of Lady Sylvia Herman, who was the kind of independent unionist MP for Northern Ireland. And given that there were no Sinn Féin, Alliance or SDLP MPs in the last Parliament, it was just her and the DUP, some of whom are perfectly nice people, whatever you think of their politics, but she just was that voice of reason. And I always think that Theresa May and indeed Boris Johnson feared her more than anybody else because she was kind of a weather vane. And sort of Tories who were more sensible than the mainstream would look to her. And she thought, there's a great morality about her. And she was like the very disappointed headmaster, head teacher. And you didn't want to be in her bad book. So I really respected her and thought she was a great person. I worked very, very, very closely with the Labour MP for Easington called Graham Morris, who is your absolute typical campaign group, old Labour, North East, left-wing Labour MP. He's a lovely, lovely, lovely bloke, and I'm the chair of the all-party group on radiotherapy, and he's my vice chair, and he's an absolute diamond. I love him. So that'll do for being nice about other people. And all of ours are great, of course. Hobbies, I mean, I guess I've just had more time. I mean, in some ways, I haven't any time at all because you don't have any breaks between meetings. I don't get to drive anywhere, or I haven't done for a lot of the time. But I think two things that I've particularly taken to. First of all, I just run an awful lot more. So I reckon I'm a lot fitter. I mean, I had probably had COVID-19 in April. That wiped me out for 2 to 3 weeks. But it got to May the 1st, and I thought, enough already. And I started running a lot. And my wife got me some new trail shoes for my birthday at the end of May. So I've been running up mountains, and that's great, really good for your head. And the other thing is, so on Twitter, you may occasionally see, after sort of 7 o'clock in the evening, if you're following them, something called Tim's Twitter Listening Party. It's got absolutely nothing to do with me. It's Tim Burgess, who's the lead singer of the Charlatans. And he sort of curated this from March onwards now. Every night, the idea is that he picks the album, but an album, probably classic, but we're maybe running out of classic ones now, and you put the album on at 7 o'clock on the button, and he does 2 or 3 a night, so it's 8 and 9 as well, and you listen to it, and you tweet about it, and usually one member of the band is on at the same time. And it's a great thing to brings people together. It's actually made me listen to stuff that I hadn't listened to before, as well as getting into the stuff that I, of course, have. So I'm a complete music nerd, and I've listened to quite a bit of new stuff during this time whilst running.
Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. It's been really, really interesting to get your answers on such a range of topics, and fantastic to finally know the story behind the milk photo, which yes. I'd seen far more milk memes than sort of Lib Dem leaflets before I joined the party. Thank you very much.
I've just noticed Gabriel has got 2. So first of all, thank you for confirming Thorpe's innocence. Obviously, that's what I would want to believe. And it is true. My wife is related to Justice Cantley. And so my wife is a Cantley, and I've forgotten the exact She's I don't know if she's here yet. We just check. She might be here. I'll ask her. I'll be a second. Rosie turned up yet? Oh, hello, Rosie. So remind me, what's your relationship to Lord Justice Cantley? Thank you. Right. Slightly tenuous. He was my wife's grandfather's cousin. There you go. Yeah. So Peter Cook, the comedian, of course, sadly no longer with us, but former Liberal candidate, I should say. Peter Cook took him off beautifully in the Secret Policeman's Ball. So this is like 45 years ago now. But if you look up Peter Cook and the Thorpe trial, you will find it. And you need to know a little bit about the Thorpe trial in advance, just a little bit. But it's very, very funny. But yeah. So all I can tell you is that is true. That Rosie's dad's cousin. There you go. But also Simon Hughes did his pupillage under Lord Justice Cantley. So Simon knows him better than we do. If you want to do further research, Gabriel.
You may be receiving emails from Gabriel after this talk.
This is great.
I think you've made his day.
Mine too.
Thank you so much for coming, and I hope to be able to invite you to Cambridge when we are all back there in person.
I'm genuinely looking forward to it. All right. Really, really lovely to see you all, and thanks for giving us your time.